They laughed at the janitor scrubbing the floors until the day she walked into the boardroom, fired the CEO, and revealed she owned the entire company. Please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel as a sign of support. For 15 years, Martha Green pushed her janitor cart through the glossy halls of Stratton Tech, a billion-dollar software company nestled in downtown Denver. Dressed in a faded blue jumpsuit and old sneakers, she swept up coffee stains and cleared out wastebaskets without making a sound. No one asked her name. Most employees barely acknowledged her, treating her like part of the furniture. She didn't mind, or at least that's what everyone assumed. Behind her quiet eyes was a sharp mind, and a heart that had once been burned by betrayal. Martha knew the company from the ground up, and not just because she'd mopped every corner of it. She had a past with Stratton Tech, one she'd kept hidden with the precision of a chess master. "Hey, can you grab that for me?" A young marketing associate snapped one morning, pointing at a napkin he'd dropped in the break room. He didn't say please. He didn't make eye contact. Martha silently picked it up and moved on. That was typical. People walked past her as if she were invisible. It didn't matter that she was always early, always thorough, always smiling gently to herself. They only saw a janitor, someone easily dismissed. But Martha noticed everything. She saw the late-night arguments in the boardroom between executives trying to cover up missed deadlines. She saw how the interns got dumped with unreasonable workloads. And she definitely noticed how Bruce Langston, the CEO, strutted through the office like he owned every soul in the building. Bruce was the kind of man who judged people by their business cards. He called janitors maintenance. He referred to Martha once as the mop lady. She'd smiled at him with the same calm she'd practiced for years, and then quietly wrote something in a small leather notebook she kept in her cart. No one knew that notebook held years of observations. No one knew Martha had earned a business degree before anyone at Stratton Tech even heard of a startup. And no one, not even Bruce, knew she still owned the controlling shares of the company. Back when Stratton Tech was just a tiny seed of an idea, Martha had been one of the original investors. But after a personal fallout with a former partner, she had chosen to step back, maintaining ownership quietly through a trust, watching the company grow from behind the scenes. Now, after years of silence, Martha was ready to take back what was hers. The time for sweeping floors was coming to an end. The company had lost its way, and the woman they overlooked every day was about to become the storm they never saw coming. Tomorrow at the shareholders' meeting, everything would change. The morning of the annual Stratton Tech shareholders' meeting dawned brisk and bright. The skyline of Denver shimmered behind the glass tower as executives in expensive suits filed into the executive conference center on the 28th floor. Bruce Langston, clad in his signature tailored navy suit and crimson tie, checked his Rolex and smirked. He loved this day, the one where he got to parade the company's success to investors and keep up the illusion of control. Martha Green, still dressed in her janitor uniform, pushed her cart into the elevator like always. But instead of pressing 14 for facilities, she calmly pressed 28. The security guard glanced at her, confused. "I've been asked to clean the boardroom before the meeting," she said smoothly. The man shrugged and returned to his tablet. Moments later, Martha rolled her cart into the boardroom. A few executives looked at her with annoyance as she wiped down the long mahogany table. No one questioned why a janitor would bother cleaning a space that was already spotless. At precisely 10 a.m., Bruce took the podium, clearing his throat with dramatic flair. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this year's Stratton Tech shareholders meeting. I assure you, our performance this quarter..." He was interrupted by a deep voice from the back. "Before we proceed, there's one shareholder who has requested to address the board directly." Bruce's brow furrowed. "What? That's not standard protocol." "Per Section 4C of the Charter," the voice replied, "any stakeholder with controlling shares may speak." Murmurs rippled through the room. Martha stepped forward, her uniform stark against the polished suits around her. She reached into her cart and pulled out a crisp leather folder. "I believe that's me," she said calmly. "Martha Green, controlling shareholder of Stratton Tech." Bruce laughed, short and incredulous. "You? This is a joke, right?" You mop the floors. No joke, she replied, opening the folder and laying it flat on the table. Inside were signed documents, stock certificates, and trust disclosures. Legal proof of ownership. The lawyer from legal, seated near the end of the table, picked up the papers, flipping through with widening eyes. She's legit, he muttered. Bruce's face turned crimson. But how? Why would you be? I was one of the first investors, Martha said, her voice steady. I believed in this company before you were ever hired, and for 15 years I watched what it became. I watched you forget what we stood for. Integrity, innovation, people. Silence gripped the room like a vice. I didn't come here today to clean the boardroom, Martha continued. I came to clean house. Gasps filled the room. Martha stepped back, her eyes scanning the faces of those who had looked past her for so long. The woman they'd ignored was now the woman they answered to, and Bruce Langston was no longer the one in charge. The mood in the conference room shifted from smug confidence to silent panic. Bruce Langston stood frozen behind the podium, his jaw working but no words coming out. For the first time in years, he wasn't the most powerful person in the room, and he knew it. Martha Green calmly placed the leather folder on the conference table and looked around. Let's be clear, she began. I didn't spend 15 years pushing a mop just to make a point. I did it to understand what this company had become from the bottom up. The executives exchanged uneasy glances. Some were confused. Others looked downright terrified. I watched interns get overworked and discarded, Martha said, her eyes landing on a young woman sitting stiffly near the back. I watched good engineers pushed out while underqualified friends of executives got promoted. I watched you, Bruce, cover up mismanagement, inflate projections, and throw staff under the bus. Bruce finally found his voice. You have no idea what it takes to run a company of this size. You can't just barge in here and... I own the company, she interrupted. I can do exactly that. The company's general counsel, Greg Weaver, coughed gently into his fist. She's within her legal rights. As majority shareholder, she can call for a leadership review or initiate removals if misconduct is involved. Martha nodded. Thank you, Greg. I'm doing both. Bruce's eyes darted around the room for support, but none of the executives met his gaze. They weren't about to stick their necks out now. I'm placing you on immediate leave pending a full audit, Martha said to Bruce. You'll receive details from the compliance team by the end of the day. Bruce let out a bitter laugh. You think the board will let you do this? Martha reached into her card and pulled out a second folder, one with signatures. Already voted, 72% of the board supports my decision. You're out. Bruce staggered backward a step. This is insane. You're a janitor. I'm also a business graduate from Howard University, she said coolly. I was one of the 3 founding investors in Stratton Tech. I just didn't wear it on a name badge. A wave of realization swept the room. All those years, she had watched quietly, listened carefully, and taken notes. Not because she was powerless, but because she was planning. I've seen enough, Martha said. I want a new CEO installed and an internal review of every department. We're going back to our original values, respect, innovation, and ethics. And we'll start by valuing people at every level, not just those who wear suits. Security entered the room discreetly. Bruce, still red with fury, tried to protest but eventually stormed out without another word. The rest of the executives sat in the stunned silence as Martha turned to them. This company will not fall apart, she said, but it will change, starting today. And for the first time in a long while, Stratton Tech was finally in the right hands. The days that followed Bruce Langston's departure were unlike anything Stratton Tech had ever seen. Whispers ran through the cubicles like wildfire. Employees who'd barely noticed Martha before now stood up a little straighter when she walked by. They didn't know whether to salute her or hand her a broom. But Martha wasn't interested in theatrics. She had a company to rebuild. She moved into a modest glass office on the 12th floor, the same level where most junior engineers and project managers worked. When asked why she didn't take the corner suite Bruce had used, she simply said, I want to be where the work actually happens. Her first act as acting CEO was bold. She eliminated the executive lounge and redistributed its funds to employee wellness programs. Then she doubled the cafeteria budget, brought in better food, and reopened the childcare center that Bruce had shuttered to cut costs. People noticed. "Who is she really?" one engineer whispered. "She's the reason any of us have jobs," another replied. Turns out she was one of the original investors. The whole time. Martha called a company-wide meeting the following week. Instead of standing on a stage, she stood among her employees in the main atrium, dressed in simple slacks and a cardigan. No suits, no filters. "Some of you know me as the janitor," she began. "And that's true. I cleaned floors here for 15 years. Not because I had to, but because I needed to see what kind of company Stratton Tech had become." She paused, scanning the sea of faces before her. "Now I want to build the company we should have always been. A place where hard work is respected, where your job title doesn't define your worth, where innovation comes from everywhere, not just the top." A long silence followed, then came applause. At first polite, then rising like a wave. Over the next few weeks, Martha set up listening sessions with every department. She invited junior staff into her office for coffee. She asked them what worked, what didn't, and what they needed to thrive. She also launched an anonymous ethics review. It didn't take long for reports of nepotism, pay disparities, and toxic leadership to surface. HR, now operating under new leadership, began investigations. Meanwhile, Martha handpicked a leadership team based on integrity, not just experience. She promoted people who had been overlooked for years. People like Elena Rodriguez, a Latina coder who had been passed over 5 times, despite leading 3 major product launches. Stratton Tech was changing, and fast. Of course, not everyone was happy. Some old guard executives grumbled, but they knew better than to challenge her now. She wasn't just the woman with the mop anymore. She was the majority shareholder, the CEO, and the heartbeat of a company rediscovering its soul. And Martha Green was just getting started. 3 weeks into her new role, Martha Green sat behind her desk, an old oak piece she had salvaged from a storage room, flipping through employee files. She had a list of names in front of her, not just any names. These were the managers and executives who had contributed to the toxic culture that nearly broke Stratton Tech. It was time to deal with them. Martha scheduled private meetings one by one. No fanfare, no cameras, just honest conversations and consequences. First up was Daryl Finch, the head of operations. Known for his temper and for firing employees without cause, Daryl had ruled his department with fear. He walked into Martha's office with an air of arrogance. "Martha," he said with a forced grin, "or should I say Ms. Green, quite the twist, huh?" Martha didn't smile. "Sit down, Daryl." He obeyed. "I've reviewed 10 different HR complaints against you," she began. "You've intimidated junior staff, misreported project statuses, and used your position to protect underperforming friends." Daryl shifted uncomfortably. "With all due respect, that's just the cost of doing business. You wouldn't understand." "I understand perfectly," she interrupted, "and that's why your contract is terminated, effective immediately. Your access will be revoked in an hour." Daryl's mouth fell open. "You can't just fire me like that." "I just did," she replied. "You're welcome to appeal, but the board has already signed off." Next came Linda Portman from marketing, who had once told a pregnant intern she was too much trouble to keep on staff. Then James Wilcox, whose bonuses were triple those of his entire team, even though his department hadn't launched a successful product in over a year. One by one, they were let go. The news spread quickly. At first, people held their breath, wondering if this was just a short-term purge. But then they saw who replaced the old guard. Honest, competent, overlooked employees who had been doing the heavy lifting all along. Among them was Reggie Thomas, a soft-spoken IT lead who had worked nights and weekends to fix major outages without ever getting credit. Martha promoted him to head of technology. Then came Olivia Kim, a former receptionist who had taken night classes in UX design. Martha fast-tracked her into product development, giving her a shot no one else had. Martha didn't do this to be liked. She did it because Stratton Tech's survival depended on people like Reggie and Olivia. People who cared, who tried, who believed. The culture was changing, and employees began to feel it. Morning smiles replaced nervous silence. Teams started brainstorming together again instead of competing for scraps. Even the janitorial staff walked a little taller, now that they were treated with the dignity they always deserved. Martha walked the halls every day, no longer pushing a mop, but still stopping to pick up the occasional piece of trash. She wasn't above the work, and that's what made people follow her. The reckoning was painful, but necessary. Stratton Tech was finally healing. 6 months after Martha Green had taken the reins at Stratton Tech, the company barely resembled the one Bruce Langston had ruled. The sterile walls of the corporate office had transformed, now covered in employee artwork, community achievements, and real-time product progress boards. Cubicles had opened into collaborative spaces. The old cold hierarchy was gone. But perhaps the biggest shift wasn't what could be seen. It was what could be felt. Hope. The mood was light in the cafeteria as employees gathered for the first Innovation Day, a new tradition Martha had created. Every department was given a day off from regular duties to pitch creative ideas. Anything from new product features to ways the company could give back to the community. One of the most popular proposals came from a team of interns who suggested creating tech learning kits for underserved schools. Martha not only approved it, she funded it directly and offered each intern a full-time position. "When I came here, I never imagined I'd be heard, let alone hired," said Sierra, one of the interns during the event. "Ms. Green changed everything." People stopped calling her the Janitor. She was simply Martha now, respected, admired, and trusted. One Friday afternoon, she called a staff-wide meeting. This time, instead of standing on the floor, she took the small platform usually reserved for executives, not to claim status, but to address the entire company openly. "6 months ago, we were lost," she began. "But look at us now. Our revenue is stabilizing. Our employee turnover has dropped by nearly 40%, and our customer satisfaction scores are at an all-time high. But that's not our biggest achievement." She paused. "Our biggest success is the culture we've created, one where no voice is too small and no role is too low." Applause rippled through the crowd. Martha then looked over to the side of the room where the janitorial staff stood. She gestured for them to join her on stage. These folks kept this company going when others turned a blind eye. They cleaned up messes, yes, but they also saw things no one else did. Patterns, people, problems, and they shared them with me. That insight helped me lead. So today, I'm launching a new program called Insight Circles. Every department, including maintenance, will have a voice in operations and development. That's how we stay grounded. The janitors looked stunned. One of them, Carl, who'd worked nights for 20 years, wiped a tear from his cheek. People cheered, not out of obligation, but from pride. The company was no longer built on image. It was built on substance. Reporters began picking up the story. "From mop to boardroom," one headline read, but Martha refused interviews. "This was never about me," she said. "It's about what's possible when we stop judging people by their title and start listening." Stratton Tech had been reborn, not just as a tech company, but as a human one. And they owed it all to the woman who had always been there, just unseen. 1 year to the day after Martha Green revealed herself as the true owner of Stratton Tech, the company hosted its first open house celebration. Employees brought their families, former clients returned with handshakes and hugs, and local schools and community leaders were invited to see what had become of a once cold corporate giant. The air buzzed with laughter and music. Booths lined the halls displaying new innovations, apps, devices, and prototypes dreamed up by people who once felt invisible. There was a sense of community that transcended job titles. From coders to cafeteria workers, everyone had a role, and everyone mattered. Martha stood off to the side of the lobby, dressed as always in understated simplicity. She watched quietly, smiling at what had grown from the ashes of arrogance and neglect. She didn't need a spotlight. The company spoke for itself now. "Ms. Green," came a soft voice behind her. She turned to see a young girl, maybe 10 or 11, holding her mother's hand. "Hi," the girl said. "My mom works in HR. She told me you used to be the janitor here." Martha nodded. "That's right, I was." The girl looked around wide-eyed. "But you run everything now." "I help make sure people are treated fairly and given the chance to shine. That's the most important part," Martha replied. The girl thought for a moment. Can I run something one day too? Even if I don't start at the top. Martha knelt down, looking her in the eye. Not only can you should. Just remember who you are and never forget the people who walk beside you. The little girl grinned and ran off to join a robotics demo. Her mother mouthed a thank you before walking away. Later that evening, the board of directors presented Martha with a simple plaque for leadership rooted in respect and a future built on equality. She accepted it graciously, but her speech was brief. I didn't save this company, she said. I reminded it of its heart, of what it once promised to be. My legacy isn't in profit margins or headlines. It's in the people who show up every day believing that their work and their worth matters. The crowd stood in ovation, not because she demanded it, but because she'd earned it. That night, long after the crowds had gone home and the lights dimmed, Martha stayed behind. She walked the halls alone, just like she used to after hours, pushing her cart, humming softly to herself. She paused by the janitor's closet, now converted into a quiet room for staff meditation, and placed her old name badge inside a display frame on the wall. It read, Martha, Night Crew. Beside it, a new one had been added, Martha Green, founder and CEO. 2 identities, 1 woman, and both had changed the world. Martha Green's journey from janitor to CEO wasn't just a personal victory. It was a wake-up call to an entire industry. She proved that leadership isn't about titles or power, but about integrity, empathy, and vision. Stratton Tech didn't thrive because of new policies. It thrived because someone finally cared enough to listen, clean up the mess, and build something better. Never underestimate the quiet ones. Look beyond the job titles and the uniforms, the assumptions. The next great leader might already be in your building, picking up the pieces everyone else ignores. Be the person who sees them, or better yet, be them.